You are listening to The Standard Show, the podcast that brings you the stories behind the standards with Matthew Childs and Cindy Paragill.
Hello, my name is Matthew Childs and this is Consumer Protection, a series from The Standard Show, the podcast that brings you the stories behind the standards. Standards benefit consumers by tackling important issues such as safety, inclusion, customer service, sustainability, and digital privacy and security. They are a valuable tool in the consumer protection toolkit, working alongside regulation, policy, and enforcement. However, it is vital that consumers are involved in standards development to make sure they address real problems faced by real people. This is where CPIN comes in, an independent organisation of consumer experts, supported by BSI and the UK government. For more than 70 years, it has championed consumer protection through standards. CPIN reps are trained volunteers who represent consumers in standards development to ensure that standards address those real problems, giving a voice to consumers of all ages, abilities, genders, and cultures. Each episode of the series explores a specific standard, which is responding to a real-world issue and the benefits it brings to consumers. How PAS 7055 for button and coin battery safety is protecting consumers, especially children, from serious harm. How ISO 22458 for consumer vulnerability is being used to promote fairer and more inclusive services. And how ISO 21800 will tackle improving consumer understanding of online terms and conditions. 3 brilliant examples of consumer protection through standards, and the importance of the consumer voice in standards making. The publication of the series coincides with BSI proudly hosting the 45th meeting of ISO COPOLCO, ISO's Consumer Policy Committee, in London. With members from 123 countries, ISO COPOLCO advises on standards development from a consumer perspective and promotes global consumer involvement in standardisation. Many key standards developed through ISO COPOLCO, including ISO 22458 and ISO 21800, originated from UK proposals via CPIN, reinforcing the UK's leadership in shaping international consumer protection. This episode of the series features Karen Smyth from the Consumer Council for Northern Ireland, talking about ISO 22458 for consumer vulnerability. ISO 22458 provides a framework to help organisations design and deliver services that are fair, inclusive and responsive to consumer vulnerability. It sets out requirements and guidance for identifying and addressing situations where consumers may be at a disadvantage due to factors like age, disability, financial hardship, or life events.
This is Cindy Paragill here with a reminder that you can rate, review, and subscribe to The Standard Show wherever you get your podcasts. And you can get in touch and find and follow us on social media too. All the details are in the show notes.
Karen Smyth is Director for Infrastructure and Sustainability in the Consumer Council for Northern Ireland, responsible for the strategic leadership of energy, water and transport policies. The Consumer Council for Northern Ireland is an independent statutory body that champions the interests of consumers. It provides advice, handles complaints, and works to ensure fair treatment across key sectors like energy, water, transport, and postal services. The Council also researches consumer issues and implements policy to improve services and protect consumer rights. It also holds a unique position regarding ISO 22458, both as a user and as an advocate of the standard. As a user, it has been certified to it since 2023, having been previously certified to its predecessor, BS 18477. But in fact, they've gone further. They have also achieved the BSI Kite Mark for Inclusive Service, a high-level certification with 22458 at its core. As an advocate of the standard, they are involved in actively promoting its adoption by service providers in Northern Ireland. I spoke to Karen about the ways in which, by adopting the standard and being certified to it, CCNI is making a difference for vulnerable consumers in Northern Ireland, and how, through using ISO 22458, organisations can embed the principles of fairness, flexibility, and inclusivity into their practices. But I started by asking Karen, overall, in what ways does ISO 22458 strengthen consumer protection?
We use the standard to enable us to set out what we're doing well and to highlight areas where there's room for improvement. And I suppose by making those improvements, vulnerable consumers are being benefited as we ensure our services more adapted, more that there's a better fit for the consumer as we move forward, and that we're more in tune with their needs. So what we found is, I think that the ongoing regular assessments, although we've only experienced two of those now, um, they're an opportunity to fine tune and to hone what we're doing, to consistently or constantly develop the service, so that there's a sort of continual improvement and continual refining, which was just good to have, and making sure that we meet the needs of consumers. I mean, obviously, vulnerability, the nature of vulnerability is that the people who have impacted or affected um, change over time. And we're seeing more people becoming vulnerable because of the cost of living crisis, and sort of more people falling into that category. So it's really important that we are aware of what the challenges are that consumers are facing outside the organisation. And we have got a large research program to make sure that we regularly sort of take a temperature check of what consumers are facing, and how we might be able to help them. So that continuous improvement aspect of 2258 or 22458 is really beneficial to us to enable us to do that. And we've used I suppose, recommendations from the standard to develop and enhance our customer relationship management database and the systems, and particularly around the recording of vulnerable consumer details, their needs, and looking at how we improve things like obtaining consent from them for maybe to identify people as being vulnerable in the first place is quite a daunting prospect for some people. It's not something that people will welcome necessarily. So we've also created an ability on our systems to sort of prompt the call handler when a vulnerable consumer is on the call, to look at whether the consumer needs assistance with getting information from the companies they're dealing with, or what extra help does this person need as a vulnerable consumer, and should we refer them to a food bank or benefits check. It's making sure that the systems that we have are full in how and what the pathways are to uh, provide maximum benefit to the consumer.
I mean, you mentioned there some of the changes, sort of organisational,
Hmm.
sort of operational changes that the standard has helped you with. I just
Hmm.
wonder, any others there that you can identify, how it's changed you as an organisation in the way that you operate?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's our as I said to you, it's our desire to set high standards for ourselves and to have that consistency across our remit, because the Consumer Council. I mean, obviously, I deal with utilities, but I have colleagues dealing with financial services and post. I have colleagues dealing with strategy in emerging markets and Brexit and food safety and all sorts of things. So it's very broad. Our statute that we've got is very broad. So enabling us to focus and enabling us um, to provide that consistency is really important to us. So, I mean, it's one of the reasons why we became the first organisation in Northern Ireland to attain that BS 18477, and that the reason why we've upgraded to the ISO 22458. And I suppose and that sort of the setting standards piece is important. Also, that review piece is really important. So when we found that the sort of formalizing our processes and evidencing our behaviours, that was challenging. And I suppose because we were trying to systematically review all our services, because it is a big piece of work, and that has identified areas for improvement, which we're taking on board. So, I mean, the benefits that we've seen, we've developed our first standalone consumer vulnerability policy, and I mean, I think that's one of the first in the UK anyway, to surface, and we've developed a definition of vulnerability that we use, and we've improved our staff guidance and training and support, and that training piece is really vital for making sure that everybody's on board and everybody understands what we're trying to achieve, and that they have the skills as well to identify vulnerability. Because when we have call handlers and complaints handlers who are talking to people, maybe not face to face, but certainly down a telephone line, and we need to make sure that we treat those people with care and with respect, and that we are meeting their needs as far as we can. And the approaches that we've developed and the policies that we've developed internally to give effect to the standard have been crucial in doing that.
They talked there about some of the operational issues there for the organisation. I just
Mhm.
want to, taking it from a consumer perspective, then any sort of particular success stories of where the standard has made a clear difference for vulnerable consumers.
Yes, I mean, certainly what we have noticed is, I spoke a bit about uh, certain changes that we've made to procedures, uh, to our systems, and that some of that has stemmed actually from direct feedback from consumers. And we have had an ability to change our approach to um, obtaining consent to identify someone as vulnerable, and that came from feedback from a consumer to say, look, I don't, I'm not, you haven't asked my permission to pass my information on. You haven't told me, or you haven't given me or asked for my consent to share my information. So we have now changed our CRM system to include that question, to include that consideration, and that, as I say, that is direct from the consumer. Another thing, as I said, that change to the system was again as a result of a direct interaction with consumer, where someone it became immediately apparent that with some consumers that they needed extra help. They weren't in a position to ask, say, an energy supplier for their bill or for their billing information. They felt that they didn't have the capacity to do that, or we realized they didn't have the capacity to do that. So that extra question about whether they need assistance to do something like that is again, so, as a direct result of direct interaction with consumers. So there are, and these changes, we're making those opportunities for improvement on a semi-regular basis. And we have um, also, as a result of our last assessment, which was in December, there was a number. It's really having the independent assessment from in relation to the ISO, is that you're seeing this intelligent outside eye coming into the organisation to say, well, actually, have you thought about doing X, Y, and Z? So those opportunities for ongoing improvement are something that we welcome, and so we're looking at the moment, as a result of those recommendations, considering vulnerability champions across the organisation. We're looking at an enhanced structure for staff training. We are looking at reviewing calls to our 0800 number in relation to when calls come in, and where maybe calls aren't being answered for whatever reason, how we can sort of address that issue. And also, we're looking at the scoring of internal call performance monitoring. So, making sure that we have a high standard of um, call answering, and that every consumer that calls us has access to um, a similar standard of service. So there's bits and pieces that we're just continuing to chip away at, continuing to improve, and we're not the type of organisation to rest on our laurels. So it's something we're trying to sort of make better all the time. And continuous improvement is hard, and we are very confident in the job that we do. But we always look at see how we can do things better, and that direct feedback from consumers is a key part of that.
So, in terms of vulnerable consumers, then, Karen, I just wonder how is Northern Ireland different?
It's we set out the Northern Ireland consumer position as being quite distinct from other places, and there are some key considerations that we ask people to take on board. I mean, even whenever we're responding to government consultations, we'll sort of set out, like, these are the key differences here. Um, we have a more vulnerable position. We have a regional market. We have geographic separation from the remainder of the UK market. We have the land border with the Republic of Ireland, and I've talked about Brexit to a certain extent earlier on, and we have that sort of legislative environment that's impacted by regulatory difference and divergence. So we also know that consumer detriment levels in Northern Ireland can be significant, but as well as this relatively small population that we've got in comparison to the UK amplifies issues at times, and so it can make the detriment more severe, and also and sometimes in some instances we can struggle to be prioritised. So and looked at on a national level, and where you find things like that is, after a storm, for example, we have a different system for consumer compensation, and we are reliant on 1.9 million people as a population for resource provision, rather than sort of 63 million. So sort of funding levels can be different. We know as well that because of our differences in energy mix and fuel poverty levels, that we are more exposed as a population to energy issues, and we worked very closely with government during the energy crisis to ensure that Northern Ireland got additional support, the consumer share got additional support whenever fuel payments were made by the government. So because we are in that significantly different position, we have a much more rural population. And also, I mean, where we've got 3% of the UK population, but we have more than double the proportion of people living in rural areas compared to England and Scotland. And that is particularly relevant because our population is moving to the countryside. There's more people going to rural areas than the cities, and that sort of rurality can heighten vulnerability in some markets and supply chains. We are, as I said, we are more vulnerable, and we support huge numbers of consumers with confidential advice and services. I mean, between April 2021 and March 2024, I think we had over 70,000 consumers came through to our advice lines, which is quite a significant number of people whenever you've only got a 1.9 million population. We have, I mean, the work that we do is underpinned by that sort of extensive portfolio that I was talking about of consumer monitoring and research, and that's into lived experiences, expectations, and perspectives. So having those unique insights into the consumer experience is really crucial for us, and we're obviously having that regional picture, we're one of the best placed organisations to provide an overview of the vulnerable consumer in Northern Ireland.
Standards affect all of us every day, wherever we go, whatever we do. By defining good practice, they help people and organizations to do things better. Each year, standards bodies publish thousands of standards, and we are looking for more people like you to join our community of standards makers. We welcome applicants from all fields, backgrounds, and career stages. Our goal is a simple one: to have a balance of views around the table. By becoming a standards maker, you could help to improve the way things are made and done, like creating healthier and more inclusive workplaces, making advances in AI governance, improving product safety or online shopping experiences, or supporting vulnerable consumers, and many, many others. So if you want to make a difference and shape the world through standards, start your standards making journey now. Details of how to do so are in the show notes.
I just wonder, Karen, listening to their talk about sort of with some passion really about the importance of ISO 22458. I just wonder how central and how important the standard has become to the organisation.
I mean, as an organisation, we have a key role in advocating for consumers, and that includes setting standards, driving improvement, and achieving results. I mean, in relation to setting standards, the standard enables us to demonstrate that we practice what we preach. Whenever we're undertaking our statutory role in the utilities sector, particularly, it helps us to drive improvement. So we work very, very closely with the Northern Ireland Utility Regulator, which is, I suppose, the equivalent would in England would be Ofgem, and Ofwat. Um, but we work with the utility regulator on their best practice framework, and that led to the recommendation that all companies providing services in the utility sector seek, secure, and maintain ISO 22458. So we're a kind of a thought leader in the whole thing. We've attained the standard, we've retained the standard, and we're now advocating on behalf of consumers that other companies which consumers come into contact with also go for the standard and maintain it. So it's trying to drive that best practice across the piece. And I mean, certainly from what we've experienced, as I said, we like achieving results, and we know that a number of our utility companies locally have achieved the standard, while others have sought feedback from us about its benefits and its challenges and the process of accreditation. So that there is a difference in approach starting to develop in Northern Ireland, and we're seeing benefits across the piece for companies and for consumers. For companies, including ourselves, in relation to performance, we're getting independent review and guidance from the standards body. We're getting clarity on compliance and assurance, and we're developing trust through that improved service, and that it's protecting brands, it's protecting our reputation and the reputation of the companies that have taken it on board. And in relation to consumers, obviously, they're getting an improved service, they're getting consistent minimum standards, and they're able to develop confidence and trust in the organisations that are providing that improved service, whether or not they, I mean, it's not whether or not they understand it, but for vulnerable consumers, that confidence and trust is going to be key in moving forward and helping address some of those vulnerabilities.
So obviously, Karen, you've the organisation has been a fantastic advocate. You're leading by example here in the use of ISO 22458, and you mentioned there about sort of really encouraging take up. But from other organisations in order to protect vulnerable consumers. I just wonder how far you are on that journey in that advocacy role.
I think in relation to the ISO itself, as I said to you, there's a number of utility companies have moved on board. But what I'm really noticing, and it's really visible in Northern Ireland, is that the utility companies that I'm working with, and that's in energy, particularly in gas and electricity, they're all starting to work together to address consumer vulnerability much more intentionality. And they are, for example, working together to ensure that there is a combined understanding, or a sort of collegiality of understanding of what's needed on customer care registers and sort of lists of vulnerable customers. I mean, there's obviously considerations there in relation to confidentiality and data protection and the rest of it. But we're trying to work as a sector with the Consumer Council, with the regulator, with the companies to ensure that we don't miss people. And obviously, with vulnerability changing over time, and people can be temporarily vulnerable, it can be long term, they can be vulnerable for a heap of different reasons. Actually, that kind of register is quite difficult to maintain, and we are just trying to improve how we do that as a region, right across that industry. And certainly that comes to the fore. I mean, we've had a massive storm in the last number of months with Storm Eowyn, and so we were a third of the population were the power was off. It was a huge issue, and so making sure that people who are vulnerable, who are medically vulnerable particularly, are protected in that kind of situation requires information, it requires data, and it requires people to have trust in the organizations they're dealing with to share that kind of information, because a lot of people will not accept that they're vulnerable or want to hide that they're vulnerable. And we need to cut across that, and working together to make sure that our trusted voices, like the consumer councils in that conversation, are critical.
Just wonder then, Karen, what sort of strategies and sort of practical approaches can organisations take to better identify and support vulnerable consumers?
hmm I think without doubt, training is the biggest contributor to this. Internal staff training. We in the Consumer Council regard training as of paramount importance, ensuring that staff have skills to identify vulnerability, because they need to understand what they're dealing with. And sometimes, it's particularly when you're on the end of a phone line with someone, there depends on the questions that you would ask to sort of tease that out with people. We undertake training every year to ensure that the staff are enabled to deliver a service that allows them to have confidence in probing questions and showing empathy, and to uh, also we provide specialist training on suicide awareness, because the situation in Northern Ireland, and I'm sure in other places in the UK as well, it's so stark. We are experiencing a number of people now with that are coming online with suicidal ideation, and that's particularly difficult for staff to deal with. And also, as part of this, those people in that direct consumer facing role, it's important that they have resilience training, so that they have the tools and knowledge available to ensure that they can navigate those situations with empathy and professionalism. And I would really advocate that kind of approach for other organisations who wanted to take this on. If you're going to take ISO on seriously, and you are going to provide that continuous improvement, and you have that direct consumer engagement, and making sure that staff are trained to know what they're doing and how to handle the situations that they'll find themselves in, and to assist the consumer and working through their vulnerabilities. I think you can't do that without appropriate training. So that is a strategy that when we've got a training program, a training strategy within the Consumer Council, we've also, what I would say to you is that development of the policy internally was key, and it was a policy to support consumers in vulnerable circumstances, and it covers, as I say, we developed our own definition of vulnerability, different risk factors, how we apply the policy internally, how we encourage disclosure, for example, with people, and how we handle those. There's specific methodology for doing that. Looking at high risk situations, and what support of staff is available, and how we apply and advocate outside the organisation as well, because we are an advocacy body. So how we actually try to encourage others to follow the same path through this ISO journey. And part of it, the policy as well, and part of how we do things, is that consistent monitoring and evaluation. And because if you don't monitor and you don't watch what you're doing, or not watch what you're doing, maybe the wrong way of putting it, but if you don't keep tabs on how your policies being applied and your activities being taken forward, you may come to a standstill. If you're going to continuously improve, you need to monitor and evaluate. And part of that as well is actively requesting feedback from consumers, making sure that we don't sort of like dust them off and sort of like tick them off in the tick box exercise. We actually take on board their suggestions for improvement, and some of those have been the most valuable changes to the systems that we've employed.
So setting that policy, organising the training, look at that constant review and evaluation. That's all been down to using 22458.
Yes, absolutely, and that the policy itself is reviewed annually in line with the ISO 22458 accreditation process. So it's all part of a bigger piece, and it's all driven by the ISO.
Our thanks to Karen Smyth for talking to us about ISO 22458. Now, to learn more about the standard, about how to get involved in standards, including through CPIN, and to explore other episodes in this series, then check out the links in the show notes. And a reminder that the show notes are also where you can find details of our socials and all the other ways to get in touch with us here on The Standard Show.
You have been listening to an episode of The Standard Show, the podcast that brings you the stories behind the standards, with Matthew Childs and Cindy Parakill.
You just heard a Stripped Media production.